Hey guys, section 10.3, The Age of Mass Politics. This is probably the longest section, at least I think it is. We'll see how long it takes. That's why we're going to be running through all this info in class and doing the traditional note-taking, because there's a lot here. And it's a period of time in the late 19th century where the political apparatuses and the political rights and things like this become massive, more people involved with it than in the past. So that's where we're going, the age of mass politics. We're looking at the characteristics of the period and how it contrasts with the past age of conservative order. And then we're going to be looking at specific examples of those characteristics in 4 different countries. Remember, we talked about Austria in section 2.2 and kind of the issues that Austria and now Austria-Hungary, as we're calling, are dealing with. There we go. So let's look first of all at kind of a comparison back and forth. Now it's going to say the European transportation and domination, but we can also call this mass politics. Okay, so in the past I've named this unit that. I've changed it to transformation and domination, but just know this is also standing for the age of mass politics. So the age of conservative order, conservatism across Europe, especially from the top, right? You had the isms kind of growing, grassroots underneath, but the top leaders were conservative. Countries worked together to put down these new isms. It's called the conservative Europe. So they're working together to stop that, and there's a lot of tension between the people and their government. So there's not a lot of cooperation between a government and the people below it, but you have the cooperation between countries in order to stop revolutions from happening. We're not playing whack-a-mole everywhere. So how is it different as we go by 1848, remember as a transformative year, what does this look like now? Well, liberalism is spreading across Western Europe and slowly into Central Europe. Eastern Europe, not so much. Countries are returning to being rivals with one another. The unification movements of Italy and Germany helped for that, the Crimean War, Congress of Berlin, all of these things, Berlin conferences we'll talk about in section 2.4, all of these are moving to where countries now want to punch each other rather than help each other punch their own people. And the last thing is that you have, because of the growing conflict between countries, the people become supportive now of their own government, growing nationalism across Europe due to this rising competition between European countries. So it is a very radically different period. Again, it all kind of shifts in 1848. And then if you want to note this as well, you have another shift in 1871. And we'll go over again what year and why that year is important. So this shifts in 1848, but then it really shifts in 1871. So let's go back to 1848, the end of the age of Metternich. Why was 1848 important? So let's learn some lessons from it. Well, we don't really see, first of all, Metternich is out as Austrian foreign minister. He flees Austria, sees the writing on the wall, sees his age of conservatism ending, and sees it kind of worthless to try to keep the isms, nationalism, liberalism, for the most part, to a lesser degree socialism, to keeping those from being present in society. However, in 1848, you really don't see any fundamental change in government. Conservatives are still going to be in control past 1848. And we talked in 1848 is that the middle class, the working class radicals, they couldn't unite together. They couldn't get over their own differences. And because of that, the conservatives were like, all right, well, if you don't want to punch us together, then we'll just punch you separately, and then we'll stay in charge. So the barricades fell. The barricades failed and fell, I suppose, and the conservatives stayed in power. And because of that, that's really the end of any sort of liberal and romantic-led revolutions. Romantic in the sense of nationalist romantic. Okay, that is a terrible handwriting, but any sort of like romantic, like the dream of uniting our country and making a better government and liberty leading the people, those dreams die in 1848 because just so many times you can try that. But then the thing that we're going to see, and this is kind of turning the page, is that conservatives are going to start using liberal and, yes, socialist measures in order to keep the support of their people. They realize that if we don't cooperate, it's going to be a continual series of revolutions. So we better start passing laws and doing things things that look liberal. Even though we might not want it, we kind of like being in power more. And this is a biggie right here, kind of an ism that shifts its meaning. Liberalism, kind of because of that a little bit, and this is especially true in Western Europe, is that liberalism shifts to become more focused on helping the poor, and there's a phrase that says interventionist, okay, they intervene, right? It becomes more focused on helping the poor than protecting the rich or the bourgeoisie. So the change is, and there's Metternich, right, he's done. The change is that liberalism, instead of being laissez-faire, totally shifts its core principle and now says that we have to protect those at the bottom. So liberalism and socialism start to merge a little bit. And that change is, again, it's kind of a reply that, and we'll see here when we talk about universal suffrage, you kind of have to do it if you're going to stay in power. So liberalism is shifting its focus. Conservatism is still in power, but with it's certainly a different focus than just being rooted in the past. Okay? Now, goodbye. Bye-bye, Clemens. Okay, so now the age of mass politics. Like, what is this era really about? So they kind of gave you a little clue past 1848. If you want to get really specific, oh, what happened there? Let's get a little race action. All right. If you really want to get specific, it's 1871 to 1914, but I see these trends also developing in the 50s and 60s. So what are the characteristics of this age? These 4 characteristics. Drill it into your head. All right, it's the essence of Unit 10. Ordinary people feel more loyalty to their government, not only to their nation, but to their government. So they feel like their voice is being heard a little bit more in government, so people will feel more loyalty to that, especially in comparison with 1815 to 1848 when their government was just looking to like whack-a-mole them down. Because of that loyalty, or maybe that loyalty is because of this, higher levels of voter participation. Know the word and phrase universal suffrage, where all people get the right to vote. And now we start having discussions, not just all men, but also perhaps all women. So higher levels of voter participation. The growth of socialist political parties. So we really don't see mainstream socialism at all until this period of time. And now we're going to see basically in each country a party develop that represents a direct financial moving and maneuvering in order to help the poor. And like I said, liberals start to kind of look this way too. And the last thing, and this is a big one, right? Because I think this is a characteristic of our world, is that the government's role is to take care of the people. Contrast that with Louis XIV. Contrast that even with Napoleon. You know, or any sort of parliament, right, when it represented wealthy landowners, or the Tsar in Russia. You know, this is just totally different. Now, instead of a government that serves itself and the people pay for whatever the government wants to achieve with war and whatnot, now the government's going to be spending money on the people. This is a huge change. And it's going to transform not only the world pre-World War I, but our world today, right? I mean, think there are a lot of people in our country who believe the government's role is to take care of us. A lot of people fundamentally disagree with that, but a lot of people say that, hey, the government should be there to help people's problems. And that's kind of the discussion that starts here in this period, is that Europeans believe that government's role is to help their own, right? And if they help their own, people will vote to keep those people in power, especially in the Western democracies. In the East, it's a little different at this point. We'll talk about those differences as we go. So we're almost 10 minutes in. We haven't really started. I told you it would be a long section. So let's go ahead and go. And we're going to look at 4 countries and where you see these qualities showing up. So for each one, I'm going to move around because I have to be in a different spot. So we're going to do it. Actually, we're going to hang out with Piper. Piper's great, aren't you? Let's see. I may do my little face ID. Okay. I don't know if any of that came through. Maybe it did. Anyway, we're talking Britain. Bye, Piper. I'm so excited about Great Britain in the years 1848 to 1914. Now, just a kind of a reminder. Where had we been? Britain had the most progressive democracy at the time, but yet it was not democracy. Remember, voting only extended to the wealthy, the nobility, landed nobility, and then in 1832, with the Great Reform Bill, the bourgeoisie got in the act. So the point here to know is that Britain's ahead, but it's not still true democracy, right? So after 1848, we see an England that's symbolically led by Queen Victoria. Let me get a picture up here. Where is she? There she is. Queen Victoria is on the throne for a long time, 50 or 60 years, and she's very subtle, she's very modest, and she represents this, and you'll hear the phrase, Victorian England, which is basically like just assume the stiff upper lip, right, and just tough it out, and go forward and be very smart and judicial. And while, they really contrast themselves to France, who's like throwing up barricades and craziness, but the English are like, do it the right way, right, and be very, very subtle about things. And one of the things the English take pride in themselves in this time is that when they do change, they're not going to do it all at once. And what you do see is suffrage slowly expand over time. The Reform Bill of 1832 gives the right to vote to middle class. The Reform Bill of 1867 gives it to men living in the city, all men living in major cities, and 84 gives it to all men living in rural areas. So 1884, all men in England have the right to vote. Now, because of that, you're going to see political parties start to represent to those at the bottom, right, and represent and look to kind of accomplish what those people want. So more on that in a minute. Another thing you see in England at this time is that political parties don't seek to destroy what the other party has built while in power. So we're going to identify the two major parties, but what I see in our country is that when the Republicans or Democrats take over from the other, each side kind of tries to undo what the other did, right, while in power. We've seen this over the last year with a lot of the actions of President Trump has been to President Obama and his kind of accomplishments or the things that he did while in power. So what the English do here is that when you kind of change, you get what you have, right? And when the conservatives come in, when the liberals come in, they're not going to throw it all out. They're going to kind of build on it. So that's one thing that kind of makes them a little bit different than us. So politically, how does it look? Well, you got the conservatives in England at the time. They're led by a man named Benjamin Disraeli. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move. I was tired of sitting down, and Piper was offering no entertainment. So Benjamin Disraeli is conservative, and that kind of applies all the conservative thinkings we've seen before. Certainly, maybe a little bit more liberal or open to liberalism because of kind of historical trends. Disraeli is the only Jewish prime minister in British history. So there he is, kind of a nice note about him. He's going to support the idea of British Empire that we're going to see next unit, and he's also a little bit hesitant to expand the vote, though while in power in 1867 he does, and he said it was his leap in the dark. He didn't know if this was the right move, but he felt like the country needed to have more voices included in its government. Again, mass politics. He's met with a man named William Gladstone, and that is his main rival. And Gladstone once called Disraeli God's only mistake. So, if you feel bad, at least no one's called you that I know of. Maybe they called you worse. But in any case, Gladstone is very eager to expand the vote. He's very eager to expand some of these government programs which seek to take care of those at the bottom. Again, liberalism and socialism starting to merge a little bit. And you also have kind of a minor third party. It's called the Fabian Society, which is a thing called revisionist Marxism, which in essence kind of wants to create a Marxist society without you even know it. You create small socialist changes over time. So you don't have the big revolution or the big uprising that Marx says will happen, but you create socialism in a socialist society through laws. So the Fabian Society is very minor, but it does show there's that socialist part there. Now, as we get into the 1900s, 20th century people, 20th century, the liberals begin to really take over England. And here's what I mean. Like we said earlier, liberalism is moving from laissez-faire to interventionist because and here's the key, zone in on this. When you expand the vote, if you intend to stay in power, then you have to respond to the needs of the greatest and largest political class. That's the lower class, right?
So now you have to do things in power that serve those people. Otherwise, they're just going to kick you out, right? So that's what the liberals realize, and that's what Gladstone and his party realizes, is that if we just support the bourgeoisie, laissez-faire policies, we're going to get the axe, right? We're going to get hit on the head with this paintbrush, and it'll be game over. So how do we do this? Well, they established what's called and known as a social welfare state. And there are a ton of things, and I'm going to just list them all right here. But all of these programs are set to help take care of the lower class. They give unions the right to strike. Okay? The lower class or the working class now can have a voice against its bourgeoisie masters. Workman's comp, if you get hurt while at work, right? Little finger gets like cut off, and now like you're you're without them or whatever. I don't know. Now you have a program, a government-funded program to help you out financially while you recover. Unemployment insurance, pensions, right? When you get old and want to retire, the government has been saving up money basically for you to have a retirement. Compulsory school attendance. All children have to go to public school to be educated, right? And now they don't work in the factories or the mills. Now they go to school. And that maybe get you a way out of your class and to advance later on. And then all of this is funded with higher taxes on the wealthy to fund it. So, again, the idea from the British is to basically take tax money or money that they have at the top and move it and help the bottom. It's not socialist per se because they don't ever want it to be fairly equal. It's never the goal. But it's not laissez-faire, it's interventionist, right? You want to intervene, you want to jump in to help those that need it, / those that could vote a different way and kick you out of power. So with an expanded suffrage comes the need to apply more attention to the bottom class. And now not only do you expand the suffrage to the economic bottom, but you also might be giving it to the ladies. Oh, look at this. Original intentions of the suffragettes. I had some droop. It's random. I don't know, like if she would want me going through this. Look at that. It's like on the Titanic. Look at this. It's just as big as his ring. Look at that. It's so expensive. Okay. No, I don't know. I've never seen that before, actually. We might have stolen it. Women's suffrage. What's that about? Well, 1800s. British, French, German law, for that matter, not kind to the ladies. Marriage and property laws needed to change. Women needed, from a perspective of someone in the 21st century, marriage in terms of divorce laws were biased toward the men. Property laws certainly biased toward the men. You couldn't inherit property if you're a woman. So many activists, many people who were acting on the behalf of women saw this as an area that needed to change. And the original suffragettes meaning someone fighting for women's suffrage. Suffragette, right? That's suffragette, jet, there at the end, E-T-T-E, meaning women. They focus on political lobbying to change laws. So they'll go to members of parliament and be like, "Good sir, would you please change the law?" And they would say, jolly good, yes, and then they never would, right? So, there wouldn't be any sort of action that would be done. So, some suffragettes eventually are like, you know what, if we're going to get their attention, it's time to get to our wild side. So, they become a little bit more militant, and suffragettes begin to fight, literally, for the right to vote. We have a woman named Emmeline Pankhurst, who is probably the most well-known British suffragette. There she is. And she forms an organization that takes the violent means in order to further the cause of women's suffrage. And they do anything from blowing up mailboxes to going on hunger strikes to chaining themselves to fences. There were a lot of things that got them arrested, and it became a very public spectacle. The suffragettes were there fighting for their right to vote. If you've seen the movie Mary Poppins, you've seen a scene where suffragettes would be a very Mary Poppins Disney-type portrayal, but you see the relative organization that would come behind it. Okay, and you can see some pictures here. These women fought, literally. And certainly their bravery is to be commended, perhaps scolded for their ability to cause property damage. But in any case, it's something interesting to look at. And we'll look at a much closer class of suffrage in England and see how it went. But the results are inarguably successful. But by 1918, it really is not the suffragettes' efforts that get the right to vote. It's something else we'll talk about later. But 1918, you see all females over the age of 30 have the right to vote. They also lowered the voting age for men to 21. I believe it was at 30 then, so even there's some inequality there. But in 1928, all suffrage or suffrage for women, the right to vote at 21. I believe the voting age in England's at 18. I'm not sure on that now. But certainly by 1928, all women have the right to vote. So again, higher levels of voter participation can also refer to the fact that more women are voting, or women are voting, more women, and it's not just men. So we're 20 minutes in. Take you a little break. I'm going to push pause. I'm going to do some sit-ups and push-ups and run some laps. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about France in the late 19th century and how it represents the age of mass politics. So we'll be right back. All right, so I'm back here and just looking at some AP Euro memes. I do that like 5 times a day. Don't judge. Okay, so let's talk about France. I've also got some cuties here. Give me a little sustenance again. It's a long podcast, so. Oh, it's delicious. Oh. They're fantastic. My throat's also sore, so that's not really helping. All right, France. So, Napoleon III, right? Conquered by the Prussians at the end of the Franco-Prussian War. There's some other things that happened in France. There's like a failed communist revolution in Paris. Like right after that, it was kind of crazy. If we have time in class, I'll kind of hit the Paris Commune. I don't know if we will, but anyway, let's go forward a couple years. And the French establish a new republic. I'm just trying to yell in the bed. Come on. She's right there. I don't know if you see her. No, alright, so they established a new republic, right? The third French Republic, by the way. If you're keeping track at home, the first one was Robespierre. The second one was right after 1848, before Napoleon declared himself Napoleon III. And then they're on their 5th one right now, so they'll get it right one day. Anyway, they established this republic, 1875. It is bourgeoisie dominated. Okay, so it's very, very centered on the high and mighty and the wealthy. It's something that helps them, and their government kind of lets that happen because it's a weak executive, so you're not going to see a very strong president. Because whenever they try to get a strong president, they end up with a Bonaparte emperor, and it just, it goes from there. They also have universal suffrage. So, again, you're going to have to respond to the needs of the many. Just like what England has developed at this time, France likewise has that universal suffrage. Now, there's some reforms here which are important to know what's important in France at the time. You have a man named Jules Ferry, who is the education minister in this government, and he may not be the education minister, but he's one of the higher-ups. I don't know if he's the prime minister, I don't know. Anyway, the important guy, Jules Ferry, declares and establishes a compulsory education that's secular. So again, secular, no to the church. And this is important because the purpose of this educational system is to create strong French citizens. Again, its purpose is to create strong French citizens, inspire pride in their country, aka nationalism, right? And to establish a separation between church and state, something that had been kind of tug and warred in the Napoleon III era, and certainly Napoleon and Robespierre, and then of course you have the Bourbons and their alliance with the church. So it's something that's always been an issue, but here what France wants to do is to establish we are a national state. We take pride in the fact that we're not infiltrated by the church, and we want to create strong French citizens. So what you see over the next 20 or so years is this question of, listen, what does it mean to be French? Yes, it might mean something Catholic, yes, but also it's the pride that you take in France. And treason is not to be tolerated, right? Well, about that. Keep also in mind that during this time, Germany has unified. And Germany is strong. Okay, we'll see a little bit more why later, but they are very strong. So the French are very, very sensitive about the fact that their military at this moment doesn't seem to have what the Germans have. So, year 1894. You get a military captain named Alfred Dreyfus. Alfred Dreyfus is a long-serving military captain in the French army who is accused of treason and supplying military secrets to the Germans. Specifically, how they kind of found it is in the German embassy in Paris, a custodian found a crumpled up piece of paper. Let me rephrase. This was in France, the German embassy. Yes, the German embassy. He found crumpled up piece of paper that had Alfred Dreyfus's handwriting. So he brought it to the authorities, and the assumption was that Dreyfus had been sending documents to the Germans, right? German embassy in Paris. This really alarms people because it seems now that we have a French military officer who is helping the Germans give secrets. And again, with the context, France kind of sucks at this point. And you got this guy selling secrets, right? What's worse is that he's a Jew. And anti-Semitism is high at this period. This is something that is certainly a moving issue. It's something in France that's an issue, as the question is, a nationalistic France and the Jewish people, their culture is very different than mainline France. So you kind of can find a scapegoat here, right? Is that, well, this guy's Jewish. He must not be on Team France, even though he served in our military, and we should convict this son of a gun and send him to prison so that we can make our military appear strong, right? So monarchists, conservatives, Catholics, all these people are pushing his conviction. Monarchists, or people who want a king, are pushing it because they see this as a way to make the republic, right? Because France is in a republic right now. They see this as a way to kind of show how the republic is lame and that you need a strong monarch figure back in charge so that you won't have anyone committing treason, right? Catholics certainly are for this because he's Jewish. I mean, to get down to it. So it's something that a lot of people see this as a way to kind of push their own agenda. Now, here's the point of all of this. Just because you find somebody's handwriting on a page in a certain place doesn't mean they put that page there, right? He could have sent the page, but it's not enough evidence to say that, hey, this is Dreyfus's fault. But he's convicted, right? And he's sent to prison. And then this new evidence comes up that says, well, perhaps it was this other guy, right, who did this. And they had pretty good evidence to convict him. The problem is, he gets out of France, right? He runs away. So they bring Dreyfus back and put him back on trial to say, you know what? Yeah, we probably did you wrong. But they put him back on trial, and guess what happens? They convict him again, and they send him back to prison. And basically, at this point, people across France are like, wait a minute, this doesn't really make sense. And this writer named Émile Zola writes this scathing letter in a French newspaper called J'accuse, right? I accuse. And he writes this letter just hammering all the conservative and Catholic and monarchist and all these forces who wanted to see a French Jew punished because it's a good scapegoat to prove that they need to, call the wagons together to get the military back on track. So he just hammers them, and he's like, in the land of the Enlightenment, how are we letting this man suffer? Where he clearly is innocent, yet his individual rights are being trampled upon. And Zola actually has to leave the country because of the heat against him. Well, eventually, Dreyfus is going to be declared innocent. 12 years later, 1906, they bring him back. He's put on this place called Devil's Island, and he's brought back, and they say, our bad, Alfred. We didn't mean to do you like that. And he is declared innocent. And what's interesting to me is that 10 years after that, Alfred Dreyfus goes on to serve with France in World War I. An interesting story, right? But really, the point here is that this is an incident that supports the need in France to protect individual rights and the separation of church and state. They let religious objections and biases come in and really tamper with the idea that this guy's individual rights needed to be protected. So certainly you could say that secularists, socialists, liberals, kind of those wing of people, that they kind of see their needs pushed, and the conservatives, monarchists, and the military, certainly they are left with egg on their face, right? And the Dreyfus Affair shows that sometimes nationalism internally can even harm and take away the rights of the individual if you're not careful. So it's a lesson that we're going to look at very closely in class, so I think there's a lot we can learn from that topic. Now, let's go to Germany. All right, Poppy, you ready? She's asleep. All right, Daisy's asleep too. She's gotta check on that big monitor. Yeah, she's still out of it. All right, so Germany. Let's talk Germany. Last time we saw Germany is that they had united into one country. Otto von Bismarck had collectively, through sheer conservative will, through realpolitik, the politics of reality, get your hands dirty, had brought all the German states together, sans Austria, and had created the German Empire. The Kaiser had been crowned at Versailles. Otto von Bismarck is the imperial chancellor, and it seems that Germany will rise as a strong country. But the fear immediately for Bismarck is that as soon as Germany became one, they would collapse. So he sees as imperial chancellor many challenges. The first one being the Catholic Church. He knew that the southern German states were Catholic, the northern German states Protestant, and he knew that could be a dividing line. So Bismarck attempts to reduce the influence of the church in Germany through Kulturkampf. There were several things that he did to try to do that. He would force bishops in the church to declare a loyalty oath to the German crown. Not maybe against the church, but also to say, hey, if you're going to serve here in this country, you're going to do this, this, and this. He took the right of education away from the church. So there's several things that he does to try to take and limit the Pope's authority. Overall, this doesn't really work. The church is still in very, very strong public position. They are certainly going to outlast Bismarck. They're not going to be a strong force in the government, but Bismarck does, to his credit, make it clear that the church is not going to stand in the way and break down Germany, which, to be fair, does not happen. Probably the bigger threat, though, to Bismarck was a political party. It's called the Social Democratic Party, the SPD. I know the initials are kind of backward, but that's coming from the literal German translation. The Social Democratic Party wanted to spread the wealth through democratic means to support the working class. It sounds familiar. This is a socialist party. They wanted genuine democracy, which did not exist in this conservative structure that Bismarck had created. They're not electing a president, per se. They also wanted universal suffrage, which did not exist in Germany at these first few days of their adventure as a unified country. So Bismarck knows that this is a political party that could threaten again to break apart what he had created. So he tries to eliminate the need for the SPD by pushing through laws through the Reichstag, the legislature, to help the workers. So again, it's basically conservatives taking what the lower classes want and doing that themselves, and by doing so can consolidate their own political power, right? Because if you give the lower class what they want, now there's not really a need for another voice for the lower class. He establishes modern social security laws, right? A pension program for the elderly, so that as you go through working life, you're paying a part of your salary to the social security program. That when you retire, you can have a pension from the government. He helps child labor laws. He puts laws in there. He improves working conditions. He's doing all of these things to try to limit the influence of the SPD. He even goes as far as to end the ability of the SPD to even meet, which is very, very drastic, right? In a quasi-democracy, is that you basically end a political party's ability to meet, and the SPD is driven underground. But to Bismarck's chagrin, the SPD hung around him, certainly was a thorn in his side for several years to come. Now, what's important here to know is that Bismarck is going to succeed at keeping Germany together, although perhaps it limits his effectiveness. Well, all good things must come to an end. And Kaiser Wilhelm I dies and that again was the man who Bismarck basically propped up, right? It was the Kaiser, and Bismarck is the number 2. Kaiser Wilhelm dies, giving way to his grandson, who becomes known as Wilhelm II. And Wilhelm II is kind of an interesting dude. Okay, he's very militaristic. He's very much a kind of a public presence, much more than his grandfather. And he doesn't really get along with Bismarck. He's kind of jealous of his success, and he wants to be the people's man. So he opposes Bismarck's efforts to alienate the SPD. He feels like this is something that is hurting his own ability to appeal to the working man. Bismarck does not agree with what Kaiser Wilhelm II wants him to do, so Wilhelm fires him. He forces Bismarck to resign in 1890, and Bismarck will end his influence in the German government going forward, and will die 6 to 8 years later. We will talk in 11 or 10.4 and then also 12.1 though about Bismarck's lasting foreign policy legacy, which I would argue is probably a little bit more than his lasting domestic policy, but certainly is an end of an era, as Bismarck is let go and Kaiser Wilhelm II takes a more active role in the German government. All right, so again, we're breaking time records, but we've got one last country to do, and it's probably, I would say, long-term, for us, the most important of the 4 in the story of European history, and that is the Russians. Okay? Easy, still asleep. That's awesome. Okay, so Russia. Enjoy the Putin memes. We talked in 10.2 in the Crimean War about Russia's issues. Okay, they have a very high lack of industrialization. There is very little factory building, and because of that, or through that, the reason for that is there's very little middle class. Right? They're a very agrarian society. Imagine France and England in the year 1500, and that's what you have in Russia. You still have the system of serfdom as well. So there's a lack of industrialization to support a modern economy. They are still primarily agrarian. So Tsar Alexander II, that's this dude right here, when he takes over the throne, I think in 1856, he sees that Russia needs to catch up. So he launches a program of industrialization. As they had lost the Crimean War so decisively, he sees that industrialization is the key for Russia to flex its muscle. So he ends serfdom in the year 1861, but he does not say, hey, just do what you want. He encourages them now to work in the factories that are being developed. And again, this is a very government-led system. This isn't so much like the bourgeoisie going off on their own and building their own factories in a private enterprise system. This is definitely government-driven, right? The Tsar is driving this process. So he tells basically the serfs, hey, leave your little shanties on the frontier and head to these urban areas to work in the factories. It's more or less, again, the process of the Industrial Revolution, but it's kind of sped up at the same time because it's not happening organically like it happened in Western Europe. So Alexander II, for the most part, is kind of popular. I mean, even though he's forcing people to, transition their economic structure, he's not the worst. But then in 1881, he's murdered by Polish nationalists, right? Poland's not its own country. You have Polish nationalists seeking that, so they blow his carriage up. They actually take a bomb and, pack snow on it, and then, whoop, they throw snow at him, snowballs at him, and it blows up, and he dies a little bit later on. And he tells his son, Alexander III, hey, dude, you need to look out for the lower class, because he believes it's the peasant class that had betrayed him. And that's what Alexander III does. He's going to continue to push for industrialization, but he's going to ignore the workers' rights. And as time goes on into the 1900s, workers are going to be really, really put upon and really, really on the outs here in terms of any sort of rights. And because of that, you're going to see the creation underground of a socialist party with very Marxist ideology called the Bolsheviks. And we'll come back to them later. But again, keep in mind, it's because of the Tsar's kind of insistence of, hey, you're going to do my job and my work here. So I got to go. My computer's dying here. Okay, there it is. We can go back in here. Set that up. Almost done. I promise you, we're almost done. This has been very long and very taxing. And
again, it's been seen.
Now, oh, look at that name, Vladimir Lenin. We'll come back to him later. Now, eventually Alexander III dies. Another thing you might want to note about Alexander III is that under his rule, you see a lot of these things called pogroms, and pogroms are organized violence against Jews. Okay, at least in this context. So you see kind of a building nationalism even in Russia, targeting those who are different. So that's something to note. Now, Alexander III dies. He gives way to his son, and he's known as Tsar Nicholas II. There he is. Now, Tsar Nicholas, once he becomes a czar, he doesn't really address the working conditions, which are so poor. He also, early in his reign, loses a very embarrassing war to Japan. Right? You don't lose to an Asian country. I mean, that's just against the rules. So they lose the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. And the people of Russia are kind of fed up, right? This working class that had been kind of developed from the agrarian classes, at least partly. And we have a quasi-revolution, an event called Bloody Sunday, the revolution of 1905. And it's basically, you get tens of thousands of factory workers who march on Moscow, or St. Petersburg rather, the capital, St. Petersburg. And they march on the Winter Palace peacefully. They're actually singing church hymns, and they come in and they're looking to have an audience with the Tsar to talk about improving the factory conditions. Well, the Tsar's not home, and the palace guard opens fire, and before you know it, you've got an event called Bloody Sunday. And here's kind of an interpretive of that. We'll kind of look at this more in depth, but it shows, I think Macy's awake. Okay, we'll finish up. You show just kind of this violence against the working class, and this separation, this disconnect between the ruling powers and those at the bottom. So because of this revolution, Nicholas II is forced basically to, appease those who want to stir things up more. He basically has to create this own legislative branch. It's called the Duma. Okay, so it's the Parliament of Russia, right? Because so to give a voice for the people. However, he doesn't really respect it, and he dismisses it often, and it really is not effective and doesn't really get anything done, and continues to suppress liberal and socialist movements, thinking that he is the divine right ruler, the Tsar, God's representative in Russia. So there is, after 1905, big year in Russia, there is some tension building between the class structure, right? You've got obviously the higher classes, you got a very, very small middle class, and then you got those at the bottom. And just to go back to kind of show you what's coming, you do have different political groups being created, including this Bolshevik party, which is seeking to improve the rights at the bottom, but are not afraid of doing it in a very agitated state, right, to seek revolution and profound change. So there we go. All right. Yes! The challenge now is to go back and look at those 4 characteristics of the age of mass politics, and then cherry pick evidence from each country we looked at to see where do you see these trends here, and can you use real events and real trends happening in those 4 countries to support it. So, praise the Lamb. I'm done. It's almost 2 o'clock on February 5th. A snow day. I hope you had a good snow day. This cup is here. I don't know why. I'm just throw it back there. All right. Bye. Goodbye. Bye-bye now.